violence and murder are common among the teenage street gangs. In Philadelphia, a 19-year-old boy was shot to death last night, the 23rd youth killed there this year. In Chicago, 29 young persons have been killed in youth gang murders since January 1st. One gang, the Blackstone Rangers, is said to be responsible for nearly half of those killings. ABC's Hugh Hill takes a look at the violence there in this special report from Chicago.
On a warm summer evening, the soul music drifts up from the streets of the ghetto and rolls along the L tracks above 63rd Street. This is the heart of Woodlawn on Chicago's South Side. In this sprawling black neighborhood, street gangs have developed into a powerful force. These are the Blackstone Rangers with their red berets. Their marks of identification are everywhere. They make claim to their turf and control it with violence and bloodshed. The young man I'm talking to is a victim of gang shooting. We've concealed his identity for his own safety.
But why do you lead this kind of a life? I mean, why do you have to shoot each other all the time?
Well, see, in the black neighborhood, the people there, they wants to be leaders, and, you know, like, we don't have no black president. We got black gangsters and all this. So, that's all our children know of, is this violent thing. You know?
And you kill each other.
Well, we have a minority that kill each other. We have a majority that don't.
One of the majority with enough courage to speak out is a combat veteran who returned to Woodlawn with the idea of improving his neighborhood. Barry Wright of the Concerned Veterans of Vietnam. What is going on in this neighborhood with the gangs? Why are they killing each other?
Well, it's similar to the action in Vietnam of the VC. They aren't strong enough to attack the people who are their enemies, or who they say are their enemies, so they have to extort and steal and kill from their own people. So it's a power struggle among themselves. And this is the problem that we're having right now. It's gang against gang, and if you don't join, we kill you. That's simple as that.
The Chicago Police Department has taken the attitude that the gangs must be stamped out to rid the black neighborhoods of their vicious criminality. Captain Edward Buckney, head of Youth Gang Intelligence.
Now, there will be gangs probably after all of us are dead and gone, because gangs were here long before we ever got here. The whole point of it is, if it's a gang that hangs around the neighborhood and plays basketball together and that kind of thing, we're not really concerned about that kind of gang. But the kinds that we have now that are creating the violence that they are and who are preying upon the community as they are, then in our opinion, they have to be stopped.
Violence in the ghetto is like an infection. It spreads as the gangs grow in number and influence. But law enforcement authorities are determined to end that growth. A special grand jury will be convened in July. The police effort against the gangs is finally taking on the proportions of the war against the Capone mob in the 20s and 30s. This is Hugh Hill, ABC News, Chicago.
Good afternoon. 3 alleged members of the El Rucan Street Gang face criminal charges tonight. Arrests came at dawn this morning as federal agents and local police teamed up in raids on 2 El Rucan buildings.
Channel 5's Carol Marine, who was there for the morning raids, tells us what police uncovered. Carol?
Mary and Ron, in twin early morning assaults, agents of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, gang crimes officers, plus state police and the FBI all converged on the El Rucan Street Gang, arresting 3 alleged members and confiscating a military type of weapon and narcotics paraphernalia. Target 1, the fort, the El Rucan headquarters for a dozen years at 39th and Drexel. The ATF, along with other federal, city, and state law enforcement agents, hammered and cut and sawed their way into the fortified old building, which was once the Oakland Theater. The second target today, an apartment building at 6416 South Kenwood, believed to be one of the El Rucan's numerous property holdings. Arrested were 35-year-old Alan Knox, otherwise known as Gangster, a reputed El Rucan general, and Trammell Davis, an alleged general often used as a look-alike for imprisoned El Rucan leader Jeff Fort. Knox was charged with attempting to receive an M72 law rocket. This is what a law rocket looks like. It is a military, handheld rocket used to fire at tanks. U.S. Attorney Anton Valukas would only give sketchy details about the arrest and the rocket at an afternoon news conference.
Knox was arrested in connection with his attempt to receive an interstate shipment, an M72 light anti-tank weapon for purposes of destroying a building. Davis was arrested in connection with a search being conducted at the 6416 South Kenwood address in connection with the same investigation. At the time that these arrests and search were being made, let me make this one statement parenthetically, weapons were recovered in those searches so far.
In addition to weapons, which appear to be the main priority today, drug paraphernalia, scales, and records of alleged transactions all were part of the search of Al Rukin property.
Authorities are remaining closed-mouthed about their third arrest and thus far have not released that person's identity. Their biggest concern, why would a Chicago street gang be in the market for a light anti-tank missile? Tonight at 6, I'll have an exclusive report on what federal authorities theorize the Al Rukins are up to. Ron and Mary, it may surprise you.
Thanks, Carol.
Good evening. Has the Al Rukin street gang forged a link to international terrorist organizations? Incredible as that may sound to some, today's raid of 2 alleged Al Rukin headquarters raises new concerns for law enforcement. We have exclusive details.
That's because in the process of raiding and ripping apart storage areas at the Al Rukin so-called fort here at 39th and Drexel and at one of their alleged apartment buildings here at 64th and Kenwood, agents of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, gang crimes officers, and other local, state, and federal authorities not only turned up what appeared to be an anti-tank rocket and launcher similar in construction to this law missile, but authorities, according to highly placed sources, now have information that the Al Rukins have been making contacts with radical Muslim groups in the Middle East. Authorities are looking into allegations that those contacts include Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi. But U.S. Attorney Anton Valukas would have no comment when asked about such reports, and at a press conference today would only read a prepared statement about 2 alleged Al Rukins who were arrested today, reported Generals Alan Knox and Trammell Davis.
Knox was arrested in connection with his attempt to receive an interstate shipment, an M72 light anti-tank weapon for purposes of destroying a building. Davis was arrested in connection with a search being conducted at the 6416 South Kenwood address in connection with the same investigation.
In recent months, the Al Rukins have changed the name on the masthead of their headquarters to include Sunni Muslim, arguing they always were and always will be a religious organization, not a gang. The Malik that appears under the name Muslim refers to Jeff Fort, the leader of the gang who authorities say is still running this organization from a Texas federal prison.
Libya's Muammar Gaddafi is a Sunni Muslim. According to highly placed sources, the Al Rukins have attempted to sell their services to Gaddafi in exchange for financial support. Authorities add that information to other information they've acquired over the years, including the fact that when Jeff Fort several years ago attempted to flee federal custody, federal authorities found he had made plans to try and escape to Pakistan. And exiled Al Rukin General Derek Porter a couple of years ago was tracked by federal agents traveling in the Middle East. And law enforcement confirms a relationship between the Al Rukins and the Black Hebrews, a group based in Israel now in serious criminal difficulties with U.S. authorities. Today's charge of attempting to receive an anti-tank missile, coupled with new information being supplied to authorities here in Chicago, are now causing the ATF and others to give some serious consideration to whether the Al Rukins are branching out into some aspect of international weapons and terrorist business for financial gain.
And there is much more to report on the Al Rukins. Tonight at 10, I'll have an exclusive report on what may be happening to imprisoned Al Rukin leader Jeff Fort in the very near future.
Has the Al Rukin street gang of Chicago tried to link up with international terrorists? Well, unbelievable as that may sound, as Carol reported exclusively at 6 tonight, federal authorities are investigating just that possibility. And tonight, Carol tells us that's not all they're investigating.
No, Ron, it's not. Authorities are also making a careful study of Jeff Fort, the leader of the Al Rukins. They say just because he's been sent away to a Texas federal prison doesn't mean he's out of circulation.
Fort's headquarters and an Al Rukin apartment building were both raided on the south side today by a variety of law enforcement officials, ATF, the Marshal's Office, gang crimes officers, the FBI. Drug paraphernalia was confiscated from the first location. More surprisingly, a major piece of military hardware, an anti-tank missile and launcher like the one you see here, was taken from the second location. Authorities believe that even though Jeff Fort left Chicago several years ago to do time in a federal Texas prison, that the current activities of this street gang are being directed by Fort himself. Channel 5 News has learned that investigators are preparing to slap Jeff Fort with new federal racketeering charges. According to highly reliable sources, those charges are based on long-distance phone taps, conversations between Jeff Fort and gang members back here at home, conversations in which Fort allegedly is running the gang's criminal activity here in Chicago.
We're not a gang.
But for years now, the El Rukns have steadfastly denied that they are a criminal activity, saying they are simply a Muslim religion.
We only are involved with the uplifting and the building of our people in our society, building better neighborhoods and better communities.
But sources say evidence currently exists that shows a number of things, including that Fort and his organization have recently tried to move beyond the streets of Chicago, have made overtures to the government of Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi, allegedly offering to commit terrorist acts inside the United States in exchange for large sums of money.
I will have no comment on any other aspect of this today. I will tomorrow.
Though the U.S. Attorney's Office won't comment on any of this, those same highly placed sources say the El Rukns' interest in acquiring anti-tank military hardware fuels their concern. As a result of today's raids and federal warrants, 2 reputed El Rukn generals were arrested. A third is still being sought, Ron.
Do we have any evidence that Colonel Gaddafi accepted any offers from the El Rukns?
In point of fact, we don't. There is some reason to believe that Gaddafi realized that or believed that the El Rukns were not in fact Muslim ideologues and did not take them up on their offer.
Channel 5 News tonight has learned new details in a strange story of the El Rukn street gang making a bid to do terrorist work for Libya. Channel 5's Carol Marine first broke this story last night and now has exclusive details.
Tonight we've learned more of the specifics of where the El Rukns traveled and what they proposed to do for the Gaddafi government in exchange for cash. When federal, state, and local law enforcement swooped down on 2 El Rukn strongholds on the south side yesterday morning, they were acting on information that made this raid different than previous drug and gun busts. In recent months, investigators began to hear things that even they had trouble believing. Information that the El Rukns were making a pitch to do work for Colonel Gaddafi of Libya. Channel 5 News has learned that on 2 separate occasions in recent months, representatives of the El Rukns did some serious traveling. One trip was from Chicago to Panama, where federal investigators observed a meeting between representatives of the street gang and Libyan operatives of Gaddafi. Another trip was from Chicago to the Libyan mission in New York City. Federal investigators believe the El Rukns were proposing to blow up buildings or even a commercial jetliner in the United States for the right amount of money. And that imprisoned gang leader Jeff Fort in a federal penitentiary was directing that effort. The feds reportedly have wiretaps of Fort calling from Texas to a speakerphone at the El Rukn headquarters in Chicago, advising gang members assembled there on the relative merits of military anti-tank weapons such as this Law missile. Fort reportedly discussing technical attributes of this kind of weapon, including its pop-up sights. It was the same kind of military anti-tank weapon that investigators recovered in yesterday's raid. There is no evidence that Gaddafi's agents accepted the alleged El Rukn proposal. No evidence the gang engaged in terrorist acts. The 2 alleged El Rukn generals face a bond hearing tomorrow afternoon on drug and weapons charges.
I'm familiar with this setup shot. It's just our 2 shot is just an extra added shot that we use to intro the interview. I don't know if you saw the on the front page of the Post, the 2 shot that was being taken of John Glenn when he was punched in the cheek. And we weren't sure if we wanted to actually go run with that story since it was so sensational. But people were slightly amused by it.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
I'd like to just start by asking you, Mr. Higgins, how insidious was the El Rukn gang? I mean, just how bad were they?
Well, I think the El Rukn's rate is one of the, I don't know, you know, have you ranked these on a scale of 1 to 10, but certainly if you're ranking street gangs that were violent and that created a lot of fear in a community, they'd have to rank 10 on a scale of 1 to 10.
Did we get that? Okay. Yeah, I'm ready to start. Can I ask you that again?
Sure.
How insidious was the El Rucan gang?
Well, the El Rucans, on a scale of 1 to 10, I think, in terms of the activity, the extortion, and the fear that they created in the community, and almost their total control of narcotics trafficking in that community, they'd rate a 10.
What impact do you think their capture will have on gang activity?
Well, I think it will, as other arrests of this type do, send a message that law enforcement, when it works together, can be effective in making the community safer, and that we're willing to keep this commitment going.
So you think it's a message to be sent to gangs? This is the opening salvo of more harsh prosecution to come. Is that it?
Well, it's a salvo somewhere in the middle. We've had a number of cases against Bloods and Crips are excellent examples of where this agency and other agencies have continued to work against street gangs, and this is just a continuing activity. Although in the case of El Rucans, it's a gang that has particular significance.
What kind of long-term impact do you foresee?
Well, I think this will, and hopefully this will, result in really the leadership of the El Rucans, hopefully doing substantial time in prison, and will hopefully break up the leadership of the gang. Whether or not there'll be people to come in and follow them, I think that remains to be seen.
I'd like to ask you about the long-term impact on gangs in general again.
Well, I think in terms of gangs in general, first, gangs, it seems like a lot of the street gangs have gone from simply just being people who extort people on the street, but to be really involved heavily in narcotics trafficking and in violence because of their weapons. And I think what we're trying to do is to, by sharing information and by aggressive law enforcement, is to put those gangs out of business.
Okay. Is there anything else that you would like to add?
No, I think that'll do it because you're only going to get so much time.
Okay, great. All right. So you don't see like a quick replacement for the gang leadership? I mean,
if depending upon who they arrested today, and because I don't know exactly who was there in the clubhouse, but in looking at the indictments, and this is the leadership of this gang, and way down into the organization as well. So
is that right? So it's not like you're just chopping off their head.
No, I mean this gets most of the leadership, and these people involved in the latest figure I got is this will probably clear up 60-some homicides since the 60s.
That's right. I was reading that in the release that you had put out.
So
it's
this
amazing.
But I'm also there are a lot of. I used to live in Chicago, and at that time and before it was the Black Peastone Rangers who this group really came out of, and they've been a presence in Chicago for a lot of years, and maybe we're being optimistic. I just think that this is going to take away a lot of that leadership.
Okay. Great.
In Chicago, it happened again last night. Kids shooting kids, gangs fighting gangs. This time, 3 boys were shot at a hot dog stand and a 15-year-old died. Almost 70 killings this year have been tied to gang violence in Chicago, including the death of a star basketball player last month. Cassandra Clayton reports tonight how Chicago now has declared war on these gangs.
They mark their territory with bold symbols. They defend it with violence.
You should know that as soon as you join the gang, you know that one of these days you could get shot or killed.
This year in Chicago, more than 65 people have been killed in gang fights. But when 2 reputed gang members were accused of murdering 17-year-old basketball star Ben Wilson, new anger in this city rose about an old problem.
We pledge to abolish gang violence wherever it may exist.
It is clearly the time to strike.
Last week, Washington announced an offensive against street gangs. It includes hiring more policemen, enforcing the 10:30 p.m. curfew for juveniles, and trying juvenile suspects, like the 2 charged in Ben Wilson's murder, as adults. Those suspects, first cousins, both 16 years old, pleaded not guilty today. Their attorney says there is no evidence they were gang members. The boy's grandmother, who helped raise them, says she just doesn't know.
How do I know? I mean, a gang is everyday life. I mean, it's an everyday thing. If you walk the streets, if you go to school, if you go to church, it's a gang thing.
Another idea the city is considering to curb gang violence is using former gang members who've gone straight. People like Roberto Caldero, who now runs a computer training course for school dropouts, and Jimmy Rosado, who works the streets, trying to get kids out of gangs. He sees the death of Ben Wilson as a grim object lesson.
It's time for us to, let this administration know that these kids are killing each other out there, and we're not going to ignore that fact anymore.
But so far, the demands for change have not stopped the killings. Last month, parents took their children out of school when rumors spread of an all-out gang war. Some say war has been declared.
The whole city's in a gang war. We wait, for the trouble to come to us, and then we take care of it.
But if the grief and anger about Ben Wilson's death can be sustained, if some lives can be saved from gang violence, Wilson will have left a real legacy. Cassandra Clayton, NBC News, Chicago.
And here again is Charles Kuralt.
11 years ago in St. Louis, the city planners came up with an unusual solution to the problem of a public housing project. This was a high-rise tower where the corridors had become as filled with violence as the meanest street below. After thinking about the problem of the Pruitt-Igoe housing project, the city planners blew it up, just dynamited it away. Today, housing for the poor in American cities is so hard to come by that not every city has the luxury of blowing up the bad ideas of the past, even if that might be a good idea. So, many urban Americans go on living in a bad dream of a kind described now by Derek Blakely in Chicago.
The biggest problem is the crime, the rape, the killing, the shooting.
It's a lot of gangs, dope, everything you name it's around here. Stealing, robbing, you name it, we got it.
You don't know what's hanging around the hallways or in the lobby waiting on you.
You wouldn't believe the type of things that go on around here. If you live here from day-to-day basis, you wouldn't even know what's happening. You'll think you're living in a dream or something.
If the Robert Taylor homes do comprise a dream world, it is a very bad dream indeed. The complex is Chicago's largest public housing project. 28 buildings, 16 floors each, more than 20,000 certified residents, poor people stacked on top of one another, their problems multiplied, intensified.
You carry your children downstairs and they play, and you never know what's going to happen. You be sitting down there playing 1 minute, and whenever the fellas get into a rage and want to start shooting or, a little scaffold come between them, you have to run, and you can't run to the elevator because who gonna wait for the elevator when somebody's shooting?
See the mama come down, swept kids' brains up right there. I saw all that. See them shot all around the front there, everywhere. I see all that. All out in the playground.
Life at Robert Taylor is dominated by welfare, women, and children. A high percentage of Taylor residents receive public aid, and almost 90% of Taylor's households are one-parent families, one woman, that is, with an average of 4 children. At age 23, Janice Love is part of that pattern. She has only 2 children, but they represent the 3rd generation in her family to live or grow up here. For her and hundreds of other women who live here, the absence of a man in the home is considered neither unusual nor necessarily a handicap.
You can have some parents where it's just rough in the household with that man. You got to deal with him, you got to deal with the children, and that's a burden on you too. You got some that's just as worse as the children. You got 3, if you say you got 2 children and a man and yourself, you got 3 children. You got to look after him and the 2 children and the house. So sometimes it's all right and sometimes it isn't for some people.
For young men growing up here, there is no manhood in going to school or landing a job. That is a loser's game. The schools are bad, jobs hard to find.
Still can't get no job. Just because you got a high school diploma don't mean you don't get a job. I've been somewhere everywhere looking for a job. So when they look at my face, they tell me, we'll call you so-and-so, so-and-so. I done filled out about 50 applications, and not one of them came through yet.
Instead, being a man means being tough, hanging out, playing ball, shooting craps, or sometimes shooting one another when the street gangs turn violent.
It ain't the building, it's the people's up in here, you know? That's what it is, it's the people. They be out here shooting niggas off the porches and stuff, man. They're like when my little nephew got shot out there and thing, you know? Little 6-year-old boy, man, got killed. They caught they gang banging around here, man.
There is both fear of violence here and acceptance of it, a resignation to what cannot be avoided. Rarely do the elevators run well, and even then they are havens for muggers and rapists. And the stairways are a poor alternative.
I would be afraid to go out at night by myself. And if I'm out, I would be afraid to come in by myself. Have to tell you when you're out, you have to walk back up. You don't know what's on the stairway waiting for you. And we don't have no security protection at all, so you can't depend on that. That sums it up. Scared.
But despite the crime and the poverty and the unemployment that breeds them, there is still a feeling among some that although the problems are large, they are not insurmountable. There are still people here who care, people who are working for change. And among them, there is no poverty of spirit. They have not given up. Catherine Wallace is one of those people. Her residents' organization, known as Truth, organized this basketball tournament, one of the few forms of organized recreation in the complex.
I would say everybody is a potential victim. That's right. So I think we
For members of the group, the main goal is to change at least one sad truth about life at the Taylor homes, that no one is ever safe.
But I feel there should be some protection up on this building, stop these kids from hanging up under this building. That's right. Because people are afraid to even visit you up in here.
That's right. Well, that's why the door right now. Anybody that would look around here, they would be scared to even come in here.
Police do patrol the grounds, but they are often afraid, say the residents, to venture inside when trouble flares. And residents also deride the ineffectiveness of the few armed security guards.
They have people running around said they are security, but they don't secure anything, to my way of thinking.
If anyone at Taylor needs no security, it is 69-year-old Alan Abe Bush. He raised a dozen children here, all now successful by middle-class standards.
I fear the good Lord. I fear no man. You either do or you don't get it. I'm disliked plenty by a lot of them, but I don't care. Youngsters know a lot of them don't like me, but that's where it better be in the state. Just that simple. Ain't nobody ever give me nothing. Never no aid, no relief, nothing. They say everybody up there's on aid and relief. I never done it in my life. And raised 12 children, never give me nothing. And stayed home up in Madden White 47 years. How about that? And she still stands.
And so now you can see that it does look more or less like a prison.
But people like Ronald Robinson believe the success stories will continue to be scarce here until the management of public housing is cleaned up.
For people who don't understand public housing, have never lived in it in their lives, and don't know what the real circumstances are, it's very easy to blame the people themselves. But I know, for instance, that it's not the people's fault that the elevators don't run.
Robinson sits on the board of commissioners of the Chicago Housing Authority.
Labor unions are getting rich off of public housing. There's special labor laws just for public housing. Again, contractors nationwide are reaping huge profits. So politicians are receiving contributions from the contractors and the labor unions. So everybody is shaking everybody else's hands, and the people who come out on the bottom end are the residents themselves.
Change will not come easily to the Taylor homes. It has been this way here for almost 20 years. And for those who have grown up here, Those who know little besides idleness and broken homes, violence and broken dreams, this is the norm, a way of life. Yet for those who have the strength, the struggle continues to salvage a decent life, if only for the children.
If you don't have any hope, you don't have anything else. We are really not surviving here. And we would like to live, you know. So I have always had that hope that maybe one day we will live and not just survive.
There was a time when there was a certain perverse glamour to it, a time when Eliot Ness came to the rescue in bringing down Chicago's mob. Now city officials are trying to revive an old war cry against a new and even deadlier enemy. Correspondent Frank Courier reports.
Destroyed. In 1930, the Chicago Crime Commission coined the phrase public enemy number one and hung it on the city's most notorious gangster, Al Capone. This week, the same agency revived enemy number one status and slapped it on Chicago's street gangs.
The gangs are more insidious than Al Capone ever was. Al Capone never sold drugs to young people. Al Capone never taught young people how to kill.
The commission is mailing out 10,000 copies of a new gang guidebook featuring photos of convicted gang leaders, popular symbols, gang graffiti, guns and colors, the tools of a growing deadly street culture terrorizing neighborhoods.
So, what's going on where people can feel they can go and stop on the street and shoot somebody and shoot them 20, 23 times? I mean, what's going on?
He's talking about 14-year-old Isaac Jackson, gunned down this week in a fatal spray of drive-by bullets on a city block where parents won't allow their children near a window.
Monday night I couldn't go to sleep. They kept shooting all night.
When I first moved over here, I didn't have to worry about this. Now I got to watch my back and everything. I hate it.
And the problem is getting worse. The Crime Commission says there are now more than 100,000 gang members in the Chicago area, the equivalent of 7 U.S. Army infantry divisions. The city has been a battleground, police say, scarred by more than 600 gang homicides since 1990.
The tragic thing is that these young kids are killing young kids and adults, and they have no remorse about it.
Today, some teenagers sided with critics who say gangs starved for recognition might see this guidebook as glorifying their crimes.
They think that if they're in the newspaper and this is going to be played on the news, they think that everyone's going to know them.
In a city still haunted by the image of Al Capone, police hope this new gangster guidebook will spark public involvement in the campaign to stop public enemy number one. Frank Courier, CBS News, Chicago.
Randy Holcomb, Eric Davis, and James Martin work beats in some of Chicago's toughest districts. They took an oath to serve and protect, but don't confuse them with just any public servants. You see, these aren't your everyday cops.
Ain't a shame. You're caught up in the gang.
They call themselves the Slick Boys, MTV ready, kid accessible. You won't find them on the Billboard charts, but their success is measured in much greater terms.
We didn't start this program with the idea that we would save the world, but what we did think and what we did want to do is save our community.
The message of nonviolence, responsibility, and self-respect is familiar, but the officers recognize how you say it is as important as what you say.
You got mothers crying, babies dying. You know why? How many of y'all know somebody been smoked? How many of y'all know somebody been shot? How many of y'all been shot?
Once the music turns on, their minds open up. The same thing that we say, their teachers, their parents, their uncles, and their grandmothers have been saying all the time.
This sort of thing is something that would bring police and young people together, you know? It would see the real side of police.
The officers helped broker a truce between warring gang members at the troubled Cabrini Green housing project 3 years ago. It is a peace that continues to hold today. The gang truce is supported by surprising crime statistics. The number of serious assaults in the housing project dropped dramatically. 3 years ago, police would respond to 8 to 10 gang shootings a day. So far this year, there have only been about a dozen such shootings.
They not only took the role of being peace officers one step further,
you know, because they became brothers, you know, and the brothers respect them and they listen to them. And at the same time, they know that if you're wrong, they gonna bust you.
What y'all fighting about?
You wasn't fighting, we playing.
No, you know what? I'm gonna tell you, I thought y'all was playing until I saw you dropping them bombs, boy. You know what? Y'all bigger than that, man. All right? Let that go.
Officer Davis, a former gang member, lived in Cabrini Green as a child, and his allegiance to the law is often tested.
If you're wrong, you'll be dealt with. If you're not wrong, I'm going to be just like Andy Taylor, and we can have the best type of relationship that a police officer and a citizen should have.
Rap stars with badges on a mission to save the world, a child at a time.
Let's get it right.
In Chicago, Troy Roberts, CBS This Morning.
Let's get it right.
Go. Police! Go.
I have to be very, very careful when I leave out of the building because I don't know which way a bullet will fly.
Richard Carter has missed the last 28 days of school in Chicago. Fearful, he says, of getting caught in the crossfire of gang wars and rivalries.
You know, the bullet can come from my north, my south, my east, or my west.
Like thousands of young teens trapped in America's inner cities, 16-year-old Richard has resisted peer pressure to join a street gang, and he's paying the price.
I had to stay in the house. In order to keep my butt alive, I had to stay in the house.
And while some studies show the culture of teen violence is declining, mirrored in today's Harris poll is Chicago's record. Last year, more than 100 of the city's 820 homicides were children under 17, a third of them gang-related.
They're not going to mess with my son. I don't care what none of them say.
Richard Carter's neighborhood is the Robert Taylor Homes, one of the poorest, most dangerous public housing projects in America. It was here during 1994, during a 3-day crime spree, that more than 300 shooting incidents left a trail of victims. It prompted a visit from President Clinton, who endorsed both controversial random drug and weapons sweeps and the ongoing plea by police to get involved.
We all have to take a look and not turn on the world news and say, wow, those problems over there are a real problem. We need to fix them. You don't have to go that far.
It's why swim instructor Lawrence Tillman is on a recruiting drive in city high schools, attracting high-risk teens like Richard Carter into a 4-month after-school course that'll certify them as summer lifeguards.
It can become a career. It can be a way out for you. It was a way out for me.
I know that I'm going to get out of here. I can't stay in here.
Finding a way out. For Richard Carter and so many other kids trapped by fear, help can't come too soon.
It's a struggle. You got to struggle to keep yourself alive.
Frank Courier, CBS News, Chicago.
One of the highest murder rates among teenagers in the country. And a lot of that violence takes place in the housing projects here in Chicago. And the Erickson Institute here in the city has compared kids in these projects in Chicago to kids who live in the war zones of the Middle East and Central America.
In the two settings, in public housing and in the war zones of the world, we often find that children are exposed at very similar rates to shooting of guns. They witness violence on a day-to-day basis. Another comparison that we've made is that children who live in a place like the West Bank feel very strongly about their home and they believe in staying and fighting for it. When we talk to children in public housing, they often talk about how they want to leave. Children in these settings are losing a lot of their childhood. They can't go out and play. It's too dangerous on the playgrounds.
10-year-old Robert Jones is one of those kids. Last April, he was hit by a stray bullet at the Robert Taylor Homes in Chicago. He is blinded for life. Robert's father, Raymond Fox, joins us this morning, along with Rashawn Young, who is 17 and lives at the Henry Horner Housing Project. Good morning to the two of you.
Good morning.
Rashawn, the study found that it is extremely dangerous for kids growing up in these housing projects. What were you up against?
Well, I was up against gang violence, the possibility of trying drugs and probably becoming a teenage father. But with the help of my mother and Chicago Commons Mile Square Community Center, I've been able to pull through some of these obstacles that I've been faced with.
How have they kept you out of big trouble?
Well, first of all, my mother, when I was younger, we couldn't go outside. We were not allowed to go downstairs or even around the corners because there's like 3 corners. We had to stay in front of the door so she can keep in constant eye on us because that's how dangerous it was. And by being at the community center, it gave us the opportunity to learn methods, precautionary methods so that we can help ward off or prevent ourselves from becoming drug users or maybe a gang member.
But Raymond, your son was a victim of violence, left blinded by the violence. Was there anything you could have done as a parent to have protected him?
No, not really. I don't look at it, you can't look at it that way, because what's done is done, basically. What you try to do is do something after the fact.
And what is it that you're trying to do now?
Well, we started the Robert Jones Eyes on the Project Foundation, which we would go into the projects and start some programs, literacy programs, Bible classes, after-school classes, and recreational things that we're trying to get together right now. We're in the process. We're this close from really getting it going.
What kind of response have you had, Rashawn, as you've gone in with your own community group trying to make a difference?
Well, the younger ones, they really like it. As you know, we have a literacy program, and I'm an editor for our new magazine, and it's coming out soon. And the kids, they like telling us stories, and they inculcate what's really happening, because we're still in the Henry Horner area, and they inculcate what's really happening in that area to fantasy. Because I don't think that they want to really tell about, the drastic conditions that they're living in, so they take it and they make it into some kind of fiction. But it's nice, and when you read it, you read into it and you see the problems that they're going through. But we have a big response, and it's going well, and I'm glad that I can help some younger ones as I was helped.
Raymond, you say you're very close to having a group really make a difference. What's keeping you from achieving what you want to achieve?
Well, basically sponsorship, because this is pretty much independent, and we're going off into, I don't have any federal funds, nothing like that to work with, and so we're going to the business community, asking to help us sponsor these things that we need. And they've been pretty responsive. I wish they'd be a little more responsive and actually give some money, per se. But I have no problem with knowing for a fact that with a little determination on my part and a few other people that in the next week and a half or so, we will have it'd be a big difference over there in terms of for the children themselves.
We wish you both a lot of luck in trying to make the project safer for your children. Thanks for joining us this morning.